Pouring the beer. Beer pour on camera. One of the toughest shots in the biz. My name's Jeff Zwart. I shoot television commercials all over the world.
The German test center was buzzing with new thinking.
And race up a famous mountain occasionally. Kind of describe my rally world and the racing world as high-speed location scouting, and my filming world as the visual interpretation of speed. So both things work together. You know, to have a 6-cylinder barking right behind your head, that's a pretty cool deal. And I just remember as a kid, you know, if a 911 drove by, you turned your head. It was just something different. Then along the way, you discover it has a great motorsport history, and racing's what the company's about. And seeing the movie Le Mans with Steve McQueen, you know, all those things started linking together to gel for me that, wow, you know, Porsche's pretty cool. You know, that day that your dad comes down and says, okay, you're gonna learn how to drive today. Well, we had a couple cars in our family, but one of them was a 911 and the other one was a Volkswagen Beetle. I just assumed that I'd learn to drive in the Beetle, but he says, you know, today we're gonna learn how to drive and we're gonna take the 911 because it has more horsepower and you won't stall it so much. I'm like, yeah. That 911 turned out to be chassis number 35. In other words, the 35th 911 built. So it was built in September of 1964. It was a true 901. To learn to drive in a 901, chassis number 35, that was pretty special. You know, after my father sold it, it went up to Washington State and it was stolen, and it was never recovered. And in those days when things were stolen, they were usually cut up for parts because it was more valuable for parts. But I'm fortunate that I get to drive really a whole gamut of Porsches from 1949, the Gamoon Coupe, to a modern 911R, and kind of a lot of things in between. And after years of doing all that, the one that I keep coming back to is a 1953 Porsche. And it's just so simple. It's got skinny little tires on it. I run studded snow tires in the winter on it in Colorado. I have a roof rack now that I can carry my 16-foot canoe on it. I can have the hottest, fastest Porsche and everybody just kind of like, oh, I don't really want to see you. And you drive that car, you're getting thumbs up from the bike guys, from the muscle car guys, from everything, because people just love seeing it on the road. And it also helps to have a 16-foot canoe on the roof. The worst Porsche, oh boy, that'll get me in trouble with the brand.
So you're not gonna see it.
I loved animals, and so I decided I want to be a veterinarian. And that led me to kind of deciding I'd like to go to veterinary school in Europe. So I moved to Germany. And the cool thing about Germany is basically you can go to the train station Friday night and you can wake up anywhere you want on Saturday morning. And I'd go to the races. And so there I was in these races and around all these drivers and around all the fanfare of racing in Europe. And I thought, I gotta be around this somehow. There's gotta be some way I can live this life. And then I started looking around, I go, well, the guys that are on the other side of the fence from me and are in the faces of all the drivers and close up with the cars are the photographers. I decided, no, that's what I wanted to do. And I came back, I went to art school, and the rest is history. I was always attracted to action and speed. So the natural work I was doing was action, and I also shot the Formula One Spotter's Guide for them every year in Rio de Janeiro. And Northrop Corporation came to me and said, we're building a new fighter plane. Since you can stop Formula One cars and make them look like art, could you start shooting our fighter planes? Which led to me getting certified with Martin Baker ejection seat certification, so I flew backseat in the fighter planes. And I ended up being this action guy. An American Photographer, which was kind of the photography magazine in the United States, did a cover story on me and called me the high performance photographer. Because of that, it led to suddenly all these offers to shoot film, kind of crazy action things. It just was a natural to go into film. One of the things that happened is They never flew for you. When you went on a photography mission, it was never dedicated to you. You would always shoot on the transit out to the mission, and then when the mission was over, you'd come shoot on the way back. So naturally, I went through bombing runs, high G, dogfights. You know, you'd get in these dogfights and it'd be like crazy. And all of a sudden you're diving and rolling over to drop and doing all this stuff. And it was so cool. Some of the moments that I remember so clearly was when the other planes would come across us as we were kind of dogfighting with each other, you would actually hear them go by. You're full afterburner.
Remix dead ahead, coming down the left side.
When you come into land at an airport, you fly in formation where each plane's off the wingtip of the other plane. And to create the gap for landing, that plane peels off, next plane peels off, next plane peels off. So, of course, that's a great photography moment. So I'm shooting and all lined up to shoot these planes, and the first plane peels off, and the second plane peels off, and then finally the plane right next to us peels off, and the peel off is like, boom, you know, it's so cool to watch because literally you're probably about 400 miles an hour at that time, or 300 miles an hour. All of a sudden, so the plane goes off next to us, so I'm thinking, okay, that's good, I'm gonna put my camera equipment away. So I put my head down, I put camera equipment down, and I didn't realize we're gonna do the same peel off. And so my head's down, I'm putting my camera equipment down, and we go bam! And of course my head goes like this, and literally everything goes blink, 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 down to this little white light right in the middle. And that was the closest I ever came to passing out. Race car driver. Peeps. Peeps for sure, because they're seasonal. You know, to get up in the morning and do a line of peeps, you know, just pull one chick after another and down those things. I mean, that is a good way to start the day. I bought a car that I had actually built a model of when I was a kid, and that's a 906. It's so instantly a different experience, and it fulfills so many of my kind of modern world, you know, desires. I can literally take it out and go down PCH and go through 3 gears, and I'm like on the Mulsanne. For me, you know, I think the first time I drove a McLaren F1, I'd photographed them a ton of times. I'd been around where they were building them, and then suddenly one day somebody gave me the keys to it, and I just couldn't believe, you know, you slide across one seat and you pull yourself into the middle of that car, and you're like driving with nothing around you, feeling like you're focused outside the windshield like an F1 car would be, even though it's a 3-seater, and your arms are out, everything, and this world is around you, and it's like nothing matters. This car is so cool. As a journalist, got to do some cool stories, and one of them was a driving school story. And the cool thing was the writer and myself as a photographer kind of immersed ourselves in the school. So we actually went through the program and shot it as we went. So I came out of each school going, you know, hearing the same thing. You should go into racing, you're really good. But I just didn't know how to do it. But then there was this media challenge where all the different magazines sent their drivers. So I drove in the media challenge a couple of years and did really well. And again, it kind of said, oh, I really got to look into doing this. But there was this other thing going on all the time, which was the rallies. And I just loved rallying. I loved the fact that you were driving down a road, flat out in the dirt, just making it up as you go. And I was doing a lot of Mazda work at the time, and Mazda said, the driver you need to use is Rod Millen. You have to use him. And I said, no, I got my own drivers. They said, no, you need to use Rod Millen because he's our guy for Mazda. So I went ahead and used Rod Millen. He was really good. And Rod and I became really, really good friends out of it. And he kept saying, you know, why don't I build you a rally car? So he did. So for the US Pro Rally Championship, he built me my first rally car, which was a Mazda. And in 1990, I actually tied for the national championship in 90, and that was essentially my second year of rallying. Ultimately, in 93, I had a Carrera 4 with all Perry Dakar running gear from Porsche, and we entered the US Championship in 93, and in our first year with that car, we finished 4th, and then in the next year, we finished 2nd, but we had, you know, 6 or 7 overall wins, and it was really a solid program. But kind of in 94, you saw the writing on the wall. The Subarus were coming in, the Mitsubishis were starting to come in. You know, it was like, it's going to be hard to compete with these real rally-based cars in a rear engine car. Because the thing you don't really think about in a Porsche is that all the weight's on the rear wheels. So the advantage of those front wheels pulling you back on the road isn't really there as strong as you'd want it to be. We were in our second season of the US Pro Rally Championship. We were doing really well. We'd kind of solved a lot of problems in the off season with the Carrera 4. And Porsche actually suggested we go to Pikes Peak. So it was really a funny experience because I literally went from rallying one weekend to dropping the car off at Porsche Motorsport in Andile, and they put in a 550 horsepower single turbo motor into that car, and I get in it and I'm sit down, it's the exact same feeling car, everything, but suddenly it's got 550 horsepower instead of 300. It was like runaway car, it was so fast. And we took it to Pikes Peak and drove it at Pikes Peak that year and ended up winning open class that first year. And we were filming up on Independence Pass outside of Aspen. I was in a helicopter, and just as we were getting towards the pass, which is 12,095 feet, I think is Independence Pass, he called upon power and to pull out of the shot, and we had a complete compressor failure. In other words, there just wasn't enough air coming into the engine to keep it spinning. And it was the weirdest thing because my head's in the monitor, I'm operating, I'm directing, I'm talking to the car, I'm talking to the camera guys, I'm talking to the pilot. You just have this non-stop dialogue in these moments of directing. And there was this sudden silence. And all of a sudden I felt the nose of the helicopter pitch up, and then we immediately pitched straight down. And I mean, it's still when I tell the story, I get goosebumps on it because it was just weird. And you're staring at the monitor, you know, and you look up from the monitor suddenly and you just see the whole horizon orientation change and you just pitch over. But the weirdest thing is there was no sound. And so we pitched over the edge, and fortunately at that altitude, you're just above tree line, you're right there. But we're going down the face of the mountain and still silence. And I'm looking back at the monitor and I see treetops, and then I see a ground rush, and you're not sure what's going to happen at that point. And then all of a sudden he just pulled up and the engine fired. And fortunately we'd been in kind of an avalanche chute so that we didn't have trees right where we had gone down. He waited till the last minute to re-engage the power to where we had all the air forced in there, and the helicopter fired back up. In '94, surprisingly, my first year kind of back there from my rookie year in '89, I was driving the Carrera 4, first day of practice, and this is something I tell everybody to this day, is that you, in your first year, cannot feel like you know this place. There's too many things at Pikes Peak that look exactly the same, the way they lead in, but they turn out completely different. I was going through a sweep left and I was pulling fifth gear, feeling really good about myself, that carrying so much speed, and I thought I was literally sweeping into a straightaway, and instead I came around that left and there was no straightaway. It went 90 degrees left, and I just pulled fifth gear. The car actually flew and hit high up in the trees because it goes down steep, hit high up in the trees, and by hitting higher up in the trees, they absorbed my impact as opposed to hitting where they were coming out of the ground. So it flew like this, and it hit actually kind of bottom of the car against the trees. And the spectators said all the trees kind of folded back. I disappeared over the edge and all the trees folded back and everybody ran over the edge, and I hit those and I slid down the face of the trees and ended up on my side down there in the steep side of the hill. And it's just one of those things that happens so fast, but it did something to me that to this day you still think about. You just really want to know where you are all the time, and especially in the W's where you're up against, turning against sky, and those moments, because there's several corners that look the same there. But fortunately this happened a little lower on the mountain, but that was my biggest off ever. And it happened in my first year back, my second year at Pikes Peak, and I thought I was ruling the mountain. Well, it bit me and gave me some perspective. Photography. It's funny because I've been doing this for a long time, and I've actually been probably shooting film nearly 3 times longer than I shot stills at this point. But when somebody asks me what I do, the first thing I think is I'm a photographer. In a funny way, photography validates life for me. Oh, Instagram. Such a simple way to communicate, to be able to just see something interesting, shoot it. Even though I'm not really working as a photographer anymore, I'm a filmmaker. I like that I have that discipline to make something really good, hopefully with my stills. I'm a 9:46. So I'm one of the few guys that has gone under 10 minutes at Pikes Peak, and it was a long time coming to get there, but it felt good when we finally had that car work like that. You know, for me to run the Panama-Alaska event, it was 25 days, 10,000 miles. I drove it in the first car I bought with my own money. My dad chased us in the chase car, and it was just every day battling, stage format, and we ended up second overall in that. That was a pretty cool event. I really did enjoy it. You know, the perfect little camera car for me, it would be probably an Audi TT or something really small, all-wheel drive, super nimble, and just have this small arm that would move all the way around, but be able to get to the ground, because I always love low shots, and just be able to really kind of work in the middle of things and not be as encumbered as most of the SUV-based camera cars are. But you know, I've got a pretty cool Panamera camera car that I use a lot, and it doesn't get much better than that. But if I had any plan of building a new one, I would say I'd just build something that was really small. The big thing for me was to actually get to drop into the Hoonigan crew, to direct with you and kind of see the way you work, and then to add Ken to that I'd only really, I only met Ken a couple times, but to actually stand there and direct him and say, we need you to drift out to this edge. It was such an eye-opener, and it was so cool for me to see. I started racing at Pikes Peak in the dirt days. So to see Ken kind of come back into my mountain, the mountain that I'm so familiar with, and drive it in the modern era of pavement like we did in the dirt days. My mind is always in what it feels like as a driver while I'm filming. It was just an amazing experience. And that's a wrap.